Welcome to my channel, The World of Science Fiction. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. The dust of Titan's maw tasted of rust and regret. Cale knew the flavor intimately. It coated his tongue, settled in the lines around his eyes, and worked its way into the very fiber of his uniform. For 5 standard years, he had served as a warden here, a glorified guard for Axiom Corporation's most profitable and desolate mining operation. His world had been reduced to the gray grit under his boots, the sterile hum of recycled air, and the oppressive weight of a sky that was perpetually black and star-stabbed, unsoftened by any atmosphere. He was a man living in a vacuum, both literally and figuratively. The Icarus campaign had seen to that, burning away ambition and leaving only the hardened slag of duty. He did his job, he collected his credits, and he tried not to remember the man he had been before the screaming and the fire. His post was Section Gamma, the deep storage containment unit where Axiom kept its more volatile geological finds. It was a place of reinforced plasteel and redundant energy fields, a tomb for things wrested from the moon's core that had no business seeing the faint, distant light of Sol. Cale's duties were simple: monitor the energy readings, run diagnostics, and ensure the containment fields remained stable. It was monotonous work, a slow drip of hours marked by the steady green pulse of the status indicators. He preferred it that way. Monotony was safe. It was the opposite of the chaos that still haunted his sleep. Today, however, the monotony was broken. A new asset had arrived, designated Specimen 734. It came from a deep core survey that had gone silent 3 days prior. The last garbled transmission speaking of a crystal that sings. The official report listed it as a non-sentient silicate formation with unusual energy-resonant properties. The unofficial whispers that slithered through the comms channels told a different story, one of shattered drills and men driven mad by a sound no one could hear. Cale stood before the obsidian glass of the containment cell. Inside, suspended in a crackling lattice of blue energy, was the source of the rumors. It was vaguely humanoid in shape, tall and slender, composed of a substance that was not quite crystal and not quite flesh. Light refracted through its form, scattering into 1,000 miniature rainbows. It was inert, motionless, a piece of impossible geology that Axiom saw only in terms of potential profit and weaponization. They saw a thing, an object. Cale, for his part, saw only another prisoner in the gray expanse of Titan's maw. He felt a flicker of something akin to kinship, a shared state of silent incarceration. He ran the initial diagnostic, his fingers moving over the console with practiced efficiency. Energy consumption was stable. Field integrity was at 100%. The specimen's internal energy output was negligible, a flat line on the monitor. According to the data, it was as alive as the rock it had been carved from. Yet, he could not shake a sense of being watched. He looked up from the console, his gaze meeting the place where a head would be on a human. There were no eyes, only the shifting facets of its crystalline structure, but the feeling was undeniable. It was an awareness, cold and ancient, that seemed to look right through him, past the uniform and the scars, into the weary emptiness within. The klaxon blared without warning, a jarring, ugly sound that ripped through the quiet hum of the containment bay. Red lights flashed across the walls, painting everything in the color of emergency. Cale's eyes snapped to the console. A sector-wide power fluctuation. It was a common enough occurrence on Titan's maw, where the old reactor strained to meet the ever-increasing demands of the deep core drills. The primary containment grid for Specimen 734 flickered, the blue energy cage wavering like a heat haze. Inside the cell, the specimen convulsed. Its slender limbs thrashed against the weakening field, not with the coordinated movements of an attack, but with the random, desperate spasms of something in agony. A low hum emanated from it, a sound that vibrated in Cale's bones, a chord of pure pain. The automated protocol was already kicking in. The system would perform a hard reboot, flooding the cell with a violent surge of energy to re-establish the field. It was a brutal, crude solution, like using a sledgehammer to set a broken bone. He watched the countdown for the reboot sequence appear on his screen. 5 seconds. 4. He saw the specimen curl in on itself, a gesture of anticipated pain that was so profoundly, achingly familiar. He saw a flash of memory, A civilian caught in a collapsing building during the Icarus siege, bracing for the inevitable. He had followed his orders then. He had held the perimeter. He had done nothing. 3 seconds. 2. Something inside him broke. A wire of protocol that had been stretched taut for years finally snapped. His hand shot out, slamming onto the manual override panel. He bypassed the hard reboot, his fingers flying across the keypad, rerouting power from the auxiliary life support systems. It was a gentler current, a steady flow instead of a violent blast, a violation of a dozen Axiom regulations. He stabilized the field with a surgeon's precision, not a butcher's blow. The blue lattice solidified, its hum returning to a steady, low thrum. Inside, the specimen ceased its thrashing. It slowly uncurled, its form seeming to shimmer with a softer light. It turned its featureless head towards the obsidian glass, towards him. The feeling of being watched returned, but this time it was different. There was no cold appraisal, no alien distance. There was a flicker of something else. Recognition. A silent question. And in the depths of its crystalline heart, a faint, soft light began to pulse, a slow and steady beat where before there had been only a flat line. Cale stared at the pulsing light on his monitor, his breath catching in his throat. He had done more than just stabilize a containment field. He had answered a cry of pain, and the entire system had logged his transgression. The response was as swift and merciless as Axiom protocol dictated. Within minutes, the containment bay doors hissed open to admit Commander Valerius, flanked by 2 heavily armed corporate enforcers. Valerius was a man carved from granite and ambition, his face a mask of cold authority that had been hardened in boardrooms and backwater conflicts. He did not look at Cale. His eyes were fixed on the specimen, a flicker of avarice in their depths. "Warden," Valerius said, his voice a low growl that promised violence. "Report. Explain your deviation from emergency protocol." The automated reboot was excessive, Commander, Cale stated, keeping his own voice level, devoid of emotion. It was placing unnecessary stress on the asset. I chose a more stable method. Valerius finally turned his gaze on Cale, and it was like being pinned by a shard of ice. "You chose? Your function is not to choose, Warden. It is to obey. The asset is a rock, a tool. You do not show mercy to a hammer. You have compromised the security of this entire facility with your sentimentality." Behind the commander, Cale saw Lieutenant Jorik step into the bay. Jorik was Valerius's shadow, a man whose loyalty was matched only by his jealousy of Cale's combat record. A smug, predatory smile touched Jorik's lips. He had been waiting for an opportunity like this. "You are relieved of duty," Valerius declared, his voice final. "Confine him to his quarters. He is scheduled for a full disciplinary review at 0800-inch. Cale knew what a disciplinary review meant. It was a one-way trip to the airlock or a labor reassignment in a mine shaft known to have geological instabilities. It was a death sentence, delivered with bureaucratic detachment. The enforcers stepped forward, their pulse rifles raised. Cale didn't resist. He offered his hands for the binders, his face a stony mask. This was the price of a single moment of humanity. He had known it, and he had done it anyway. As they led him away, he glanced back at the containment cell. The soft light within specimen 734 was pulsing faster now, a steady, rhythmic thrum of energy that seemed to beat in time with his own heart. The chaos began with a sound. It was not an explosion, but a pure, resonant tone that vibrated through the deck plates and made the bulkhead sing. The lights in the corridor flickered and died, plunging them into the red, pulsing glow of the emergency backup system. The enforcers stumbled, disoriented. The magnetic binders on Cale's wrists deactivated with a soft click. A second tone, higher and sharper, shattered the obsidian glass of the containment cell. Alarms shrieked across the station, a cacophony of panicked, automated warnings. From the containment bay, there came the sound of rending metal and the distinctive snap hiss of pulse rifle fire, followed by screams that were cut short. Cale didn't hesitate. He drove his elbow back into the face of the nearest enforcer, then spun, using the man's falling body as a shield against a blast from the second. He disarmed the stunned guard in a fluid motion that was pure muscle memory from 100 forgotten firefights. He was moving before he had even formed a conscious thought, his instincts screaming at him to run, to survive. He fell back into the containment bay, the pulse rifle held ready. The scene was one of devastation. The heavy plasteel cell was twisted and torn open from the inside. The enforcers lay broken on the floor. And in the center of the room stood Specimen 734, its crystalline form glowing with a brilliant inner light. It was not attacking. It was simply standing there, waiting. It turned its head towards him. The gentle light it had shown before was now a blazing corona, but Cale felt no menace from it. He felt an invitation, a sense of shared purpose. Valerius and Jorik were gone, having clearly fled at the first sign of trouble. He was alone with the creature he had inadvertently freed. A squad of enforcers appeared at the far end of the bay, their rifles leveling. "Drop the weapon," one of them shouted. Before Cale could react, the creature moved. It didn't run or leap. It flowed, covering the distance between them in an instant, a river of living light. It positioned itself between him and the enforcers just as they opened fire. The energy bolts, designed to punch through body armor, impacted its crystalline body and dissipated into harmless showers of sparks. It shielded him. Then, it reached out a slender, multifaceted limb and touched his chest. A jolt, not of electricity, but of pure information, shot through him. He saw a path, a route through the labyrinthine mining tunnels, a way out into the desolate safety of the moon's surface. It was a silent, desperate plea. Flee with me. He had no reason to trust it. It was alien, powerful, and had just torn through a squad of trained men. But he also had no reason to stay. Axiom had already sentenced him to death. He looked from the advancing enforcers to the glowing being before him. He made his choice. "This way," he said, his voice hoarse, and began to run. The creature flowed along beside him, a silent, luminous partner in their sudden, desperate exodus. The mining tunnels were a maze of rock and darkness, lit only by the intermittent glow of emergency strobes and the steady, soft light emanating from his companion. The air was thick with the smell of ozone and pulverized rock. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit were growing louder, the shouts of men, the heavy tread of combat boots, and the high-pitched whine of grav sled engines. They moved through a network of service corridors and abandoned shafts, the route fed into Cale's mind by the creature. It was a map born of the moon itself, a path known only to something that was one with the rock. Still, Jorik's pursuit was relentless. The lieutenant knew these tunnels almost as well as Cale did, and he was driven by a fanatic zeal. They were funneled into a narrow excavation corridor, a dead end blocked by a recent rockfall. The sounds of the pursuit squad grew closer, echoing off the tight stone walls. They were trapped. Cale raised his rifle, his back pressing against the cold rock. "End of the line," he muttered, more to himself than to the being beside him. He prepared to sell his life dearly. Jorik and his squad rounded the corner, their helmet lamps cutting through the gloom. "Nowhere left to run, Warden," Jorik spat, his voice distorted by his helmet's external speaker. He raised his rifle, the weapon's targeting laser painting a red dot on Cale's chest. "Axiom thanks you for capturing the asset for us. As for you, your service is no longer required." Cale braced for the impact. But before Jorik could fire, his companion acted. It stepped forward, raising its crystalline hands. The air grew thick, vibrating with an unseen energy. It unleashed a wave of sound, a single, perfectly pitched sonic pulse that was beyond the range of human hearing but devastating to the sensitive electronics of the enforcer's gear. The helmet lamps exploded in showers of sparks. The targeting lasers winked out. The enforcers cried out, clutching their heads as their comms and optical sensors overloaded with a blast of pure static. They were deafened, blinded, and disoriented. Jorik stumbled back, firing blindly into the darkness. This was the opening Cale needed. He lunged forward, moving through the chaos with the deadly grace of a predator. He slammed into Jorik, driving the lieutenant's rifle upward. The weapon discharged, the energy bolt searing a black scar across the ceiling. Cale disarmed him with a swift, brutal twist of the arm and sent him crashing to the floor. A deep groan echoed through the tunnel. The ceiling above them began to fracture, stressed by the stray rifle blast. Dust and rock rained down. The entire tunnel was coming down. "We have to go," Cale yelled, grabbing his companion's arm. The creature felt solid and cool, like polished stone. He pulled it towards the rockfall at the end of the tunnel. It was their only chance. He saw a narrow gap, a space barely wide enough for a man to squeeze through. He shoved the creature towards it. Go. Now. As it slipped through the opening, a massive boulder broke free from the ceiling, plummeting down towards the gap. Kale threw his entire body against the falling rock, his muscles screaming in protest, trying to hold it back for just a fraction of a second. The weight was immense, crushing. He felt his bones begin to creak. Just as his strength failed, a multifaceted hand reached back through the gap and gripped his own. An impossible strength surged through him, pulling him forward, dragging him through the opening an instant before the boulder crashed down, sealing the tunnel behind them in a final, thunderous roar. They lay in the darkness on the other side, panting, surrounded by the sudden, profound silence. Kale looked at the being beside him, its inner light a soft beacon in the pitch black. It had saved him from Jorik. He had saved it from the collapse. The debt was balanced. An alliance, forged in desperation and mutual protection, was now sealed in the silent heart of the moon. Their journey took them out onto the surface, a landscape of breathtaking desolation. A fine, gray dust, as sharp as powdered glass, covered everything. Jagged peaks of black rock clawed at a sky that was a permanent, star-dusted void. The distant sun was a brilliant, sterile point of light that offered no warmth, only a harsh, unforgiving glare. There was no wind, no sound, only the whisper of Kale's own life support and the immense, crushing silence of the vacuum. His companion, which he had begun to think of as Lyra, a name that came to him unbidden, seemed diminished out here. Its inner light was muted, its movements slower. The raw vacuum and the hard radiation of space were clearly taking a toll on its unique biology. Kale adjusted the output of his suit's external power pack, creating a weak, flickering energy shield around her form. It wasn't much, a barely there shimmer in the void, but it seemed to help. Her light grew a fraction brighter, steadier. She inclined her head in a gesture he was beginning to interpret as gratitude. They traveled for what felt like days, moving through canyons carved by ancient, long-vanished ice flows and across plains of shimmering, razor-edged dust. Their pursuers were still out there. Kale occasionally saw the distant glint of a patrol craft against the black sky. They moved by night, using the moon's own shadow to hide their progress. During the long, exposed days, Lyra led them to shelter. She seemed to sense weaknesses in the rock, guiding them into crystalline caves that offered protection from the sun's radiation and Axiom's prying eyes. Inside these caves, the world transformed. The walls were lined with massive, glowing crystals that pulsed with a soft, internal light, echoing Lyra's own luminescence. The air was still and cold, but it felt sacred, like a cathedral built by geology and time. It was here, in the quiet safety of the deep rock, that their communication deepened. It was a language without words, a flow of images and pure emotion. She would touch his helmet, and he would understand her need for energy. He would rest his gloved hand on her shoulder, and she would sense his exhaustion and fear. They were two disparate beings, a scarred soldier of flesh and bone and a creature of living crystal, bound by a shared ordeal. One cycle. As they rested deep within a cavern that hummed with a palpable energy, Lyra grew still. She reached out and placed her hand flat against the side of Kale's helmet. The world dissolved. He was no longer in the cave. He was floating in a vast, incandescent space, a place of light and sound that was the moon's core. He saw them, her people. They were beings of light and resonance, their forms shifting and flowing together, part of a single, vast consciousness that was inextricably linked to the geological life of the moon. They were the silicates. They were not creatures living in the rock. They were the rock, alive and aware. Their thoughts were not words, but harmonies, a symphony of existence that had played in the darkness for eons. Then he saw Axiom. He saw the drills, brutal, ugly machines of steel and fire, tearing into the moon's crust. He felt the violation, the raw, physical pain as the drills bit deep, severing connections, silencing the ancient harmonies. This was not mining. This was torture. It was a lobotomy performed with a kilometer-long drill bit. The vision sharpened, focusing on a single memory, a memory that felt like it belonged to Valerius. He saw the commander in a dusty archive, looking at data slates from a failed colonization attempt decades ago. The old records spoke of the planet's soul, of a sentient geology. Valerius was not ignorant. He knew exactly what he was doing. He was not drilling for minerals. He was intentionally targeting the nexus points of the silicate consciousness, believing that by shattering it, he could harvest the raw life force of a planetary intelligence, a power source beyond imagination. Lyra was not just a geological specimen. She was a key, a focal point of that consciousness, captured in a desperate attempt to understand how to break it. The truth settled in Cale's gut like a block of ice. He was not just a guard in a mining facility. He had been a prison warden for a god. He had been an accomplice to a slow, methodical deicide. The image of the drills, the feeling of the moon's silent scream, was so visceral that he recoiled, breaking the connection. He stumbled back, his breath ragged inside his helmet. He looked at Lyra, seeing her now not as an alien or an asset, but as the last, desperate cry of a dying world. The scale of Axiom's depravity, of Valerius's monstrous ambition, was staggering. He had spent his life fighting for systems, for governments and corporations, believing in the codes and the orders they gave him. He saw now that he had always been on the wrong side. He sank to his knees on the crystalline floor, the weight of the revelation crushing him. His own past came rushing back, unbidden. The smoke-choked skies of Icarus. The orders to shell a residential block because it was a suspected insurgent position, the face of a young girl in the rubble, her eyes wide and unseeing. He had followed orders, done his duty, and his reward was a soul scarred with the ghosts of those he had failed to protect. He had been a good soldier, and it had cost him everything that mattered. Lyra knelt before him. Her form was soft, the light within her gentle. She reached out a slender hand and, with infinite care, touched the scarred side of his face through his transparent faceplate. She could not feel the raised, discolored flesh, but Cale knew, with absolute certainty, that she could feel the wound beneath it. She could sense the pain he carried, the memories that were his own personal, internal scars. In that moment, there was a profound and silent communion. She shared his pain, and he shared hers. She was a warrior, fighting for her home, for the survival of her entire species. He had once been the same, before cynicism and exhaustion had eroded his purpose. He looked at her, this being of light and crystal, and saw a reflection of the soldier he had once hoped to be. A new purpose began to solidify in the ruins of his old life. He would no longer be a warden. He would be a guardian. The relative peace of their journey was shattered by the roar of engines. Jork had found them. A squadron of heavily modified grav sleds, armed with mining lasers and kinetic cannons, swept over the ridge of the canyon they were crossing. At their head was a larger command sled, and Cale could just make out Jorik's form standing near the pilot, pointing down at them with furious intent. Nowhere left to hide, Cale. Jorik's voice boomed over the sled's external speakers, amplified and distorted. The commander wants his property back. He'll be pleased I'm bringing it back with your corpse as a bonus. The sleds descended, kicking up clouds of gray dust. Laser fires stitched across the ground around them, superheating the rock into molten glass. Cale grabbed Lyra and pulled her behind a tall spire of black stone. The fight was not one they could win through evasion. They had to stand their ground. "Stay behind me," he said, though he knew she understood the intent without the words. He raised his captured pulse rifle, the weapon feeling light and inadequate against the armored sleds. Lyra, however, had no intention of hiding. She stepped out from behind the rock, her body glowing with a fierce, white-hot intensity. She was no longer a refugee, she was a weapon. She raised her hands, and the very ground beneath the sleds began to tremble. Crystalline spikes, as sharp as spears and as large as trees, erupted from the moon's surface. One sled was impaled from below, its engine exploding in a silent, brilliant fireball. Another swerved to avoid a spike and crashed into the canyon wall. Cale used the chaos to his advantage. He targeted the command sled, firing precise shots at its exposed engine cowling. Sparks flew, and the sled began to list, smoke pouring from its damaged systems. Enraged, Jorik grabbed the controls of the sled's main weapon, a heavy-duty mining laser, and aimed it directly at Lyra. "Die, you witch!" he screamed, his voice raw with hatred. A thick, searing beam of energy shot across the canyon. Cale saw it coming. He shoved Lyra aside, taking the full force of the beam on his own body. His suit's personal shield flared violently and died. The armor on his chest plate glowed red, then white, melting under the intense heat. The pain was excruciating, a fire that consumed his entire being. He collapsed, his vision fading to black. He was dimly aware of a sound, a piercing shriek of pure harmonic energy. When his vision cleared, he saw that the remaining sleds were plummeting from the sky, their systems dead. Jorg's command sled had slammed into the ground, a wreck of twisted metal. Lyra stood over the wreckage, her light pulsing with a terrifying power. She had unleashed a focused electromagnetic pulse, a scream of energy that had fried every active system in the canyon. She flowed to his side, her light softening to a gentle, worried glow. She touched his chest, where the armor was a molten ruin. The pain in his body was immense, but it was nothing compared to the cold certainty that was dawning in his mind. They had won this battle, but it was a Pyrrhic victory. Jorg's attack was just the beginning. Valerius would send more. He would send everything. As Lyra's cool touch seemed to leach some of the heat from his wound, she projected a new vision into his mind, one born of desperation and grim necessity. He saw Valerius on the command deck of Titan's Maw, standing before a holographic display of the moon. The commander's face was a mask of furious resolve. He initiated a new protocol. Final extraction, a massive drill, the station's primary deep core excavator, was being recalibrated. Its target was no longer a mineral vein, but the absolute center of the moon, the nexus of the silicate consciousness. Kale saw the Axiom fleet in orbit, a swarm of destroyers and cruisers, moving into a containment pattern. They weren't there to support the mining operation. They were there to harvest the spoils. Valerius intended to shatter the moon's core, releasing an energy blast of unimaginable power, a death cry that he would capture and weaponize. It was a plan of such monstrous, galaxy-altering arrogance that it took Kale's breath away. They could not fight a fleet. They could not stop a drill that could chew through a planet's mantle. This was a war they could not possibly win. The grim reality settled over them. They were outmatched, outgunned, and running out of time. The countdown for the final extraction had already begun. They had hours, at most. Kale looked at the Axiom fleet in his mind's eye, a steel net closing around them. Then he looked at Lyra, at the weary light that pulsed from her core. She was powerful, but she was one being against an army. Her people were deep in the core, a consciousness that was powerful but diffuse, unable to focus its power to resist such a brutal, direct assault. It was in that moment of shared despair that Lyra showed him the final piece of the puzzle. There was a way, a single, desperate, impossible solution. She showed him a chamber at the very heart of the moon, a place where the geocrystalline matrix was purest. It was the central nexus, the heart of her people, and it was the drill's final destination. The silicate consciousness, she explained, could defend itself. It could generate a harmonic shield of immense power, a resonance wave that would not just stop the drill, but would shatter it into component atoms. This wave, propagated outward, would also resonate with the power cores of the Axiom fleet, overloading and disabling them completely. It would be a checkmate move, ending the conflict in a single, silent instant. But there was a catch. To create such a focused, powerful wave, the consciousness needed a focal point. It needed a conductor, a bridge between its own silicate, resonant nature and the crude, energetic technology of its attackers. It needed a mind, a single, sentient consciousness, to voluntarily integrate with the central nexus. This mind would act as a lens, focusing the entirety of the moon's life force into one defensive act. The process, she showed him, was absolute. The mind that integrated with the nexus would not be destroyed, but it would cease to be an individual. Its consciousness would be subsumed, spread throughout the entire crystalline lattice of the moon. It would become one with the planet, its thoughts dissolving into the slow, ancient hum of geology. It would become a permanent part of the system, a silent, eternal warden. The sacrifice would be total, not just life, but identity itself. And it had to be an organic mind, a human mind. Kale lay on the cold ground, the pain from his burns a distant, throbbing ache. He looked up at the black, star-filled sky. He was a man with no future. Axiom had declared him a traitor. His past was a litany of failures and regrets, a long road of following orders that had led him to this desolate rock at the edge of nowhere. His life was already over, in a way. He had been a ghost for years, just going through the motions of living. He thought of the life he would be giving up. It was a small, empty thing. A sterile room, a meager credit balance, a collection of bitter memories. He weighed it against the life of an entire world, the existence of a species that sang in the heart of a planet. He weighed his own scarred, weary identity against the chance to give his end a meaning that his life had never possessed. To protect, not because he was ordered to, but because it was right. To become a shield for a people who had shown him more empathy than his own kind ever had. The choice was not difficult. It felt inevitable, like the final turn on a path he had been walking his entire life. He had been a soldier who brought destruction. Now, he could be a guardian who brought peace. He could become the beacon he had once followed, the safe harbor at the end of a long, dark journey. He spent the remainder of the cycle in quiet contemplation, watching the distant, uncaring stars wheel across the void. He did not wrestle with his decision. He accepted it. It settled over him with a strange and profound sense of peace, a calm he had not felt since before the wars, since he was a boy who still believed in heroes. He was being given a chance to finally become one, not in a blaze of glory, but in a silent, eternal vigil. When the harsh light of the sun once again touched the tops of the canyons, he rose to his feet, his movements stiff with pain. Lyra was watching him, her light soft and questioning. He walked over to her, his shadow long and sharp on the gray dust. He didn't need to speak. She already knew. He reached out and placed his gloved hand on her cool, crystalline arm. He met her unseen gaze and gave a single, slow nod. A wave of emotion washed over him from her, a sorrow so deep and vast it felt as old as the mountains around them. But beneath the sorrow, there was a powerful current of respect, of gratitude that was humbling in its intensity. She did not try to dissuade him. She understood the nature of sacrifice. She accepted his choice. Together, they turned and began the long journey back to Titan's Maw. He was no longer running from his death. He was walking toward his purpose. The return to the mining facility was a descent into a mechanical hell. The entire complex was on high alert. A hornet's nest stirred to a frenzy. Searchlights cut swaths of brilliant white across the desolate landscape, and heavily armed patrols moved in coordinated patterns through the canyons. Kale and Lyra moved like ghosts in the shadows, her innate connection to the moon guiding them through forgotten service tunnels and seismic fissures, bypassing patrols and sensor grids. Their destination was the heart of the facility, the central command deck, which overlooked the primary drilling shaft. It was from there that Valerius oversaw his monstrous operation, and it was from there that Kale would have to gain access to the shaft itself to begin his final descent. They fought their way through the station's lower levels, a brutal, close-quarters campaign. Kale's combat skills, honed in the crucible of war, were a storm of precise, economical violence. He moved from shadow to shadow, disabling guards with silent takedowns or short, controlled bursts from his rifle. Lyra was a force of nature at his side. She could warp light to create pockets of utter darkness, or generate localized sonic fields that disabled security systems and incapacitated guards without killing them. They were a perfect fusion of tactical cunning and raw, elemental power. They reached the command deck's access corridor, only to find their path blocked. Commander Valerius stood there, not in the safety of his control room, but waiting for them, flanked by his elite guard. And beside him, his face a contorted mask of vengeful fury, was Lieutenant Jorik, his arm in a medical brace but his good hand clutching a heavy-bore plasma pistol. "I knew you'd come back, Kale," Valerius said, his voice calm and cold. "The desperate always return to the scene of their failure. A foolish, sentimental attachment to the place where your pathetic little rebellion began." "This isn't a rebellion, Valerius," Kale replied, his own voice low and steady. "It's an execution of your plan." Valerius laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "My plan is already in motion. The drill will reach the core in 20 minutes. You are a footnote, a minor delay. Jorik, kill him. Bring me the asset." The corridor erupted in a storm of plasma fire. Lyra surged forward, a shield of brilliant, solid light coalescing around her. The bolts of energy splashed harmlessly against her crystalline form. She was a bulwark, a living wall, drawing the fire of the entire elite guard, giving Kale the opening he needed. He broke from cover, sprinting towards Valerius, ignoring Jorik. The secondary antagonist was a distraction. The true objective was the commander and the drill controls. Jorik, enraged at being ignored, leveled his pistol at Kale's back. "You're mine, traitor," he screamed. A shard of crystal, impossibly sharp, shot from Lyra's hand and pierced the plasma pistol. The weapon exploded, consuming Jorik in a brief, brilliant flash of blue-white energy. Lyra never stopped moving, a whirlwind of light and force, engaging the rest of the guard in a silent, deadly ballet. Kale slammed into Valerius, driving him back into the command center. The room was a hollow sphere of screens and consoles, all displaying the drill's inexorable progress. A massive holographic image of the moon dominated the center of the room, a red line descending towards its core. The fight was brief and brutal. Valerius was no mere corporate officer. He was a trained combatant, strong and ruthless. He fought with a power knife, its vibro edge humming. But Kale fought with the quiet desperation of a man who had already accepted his own end. He had nothing left to lose. He moved inside the commander's guard, taking a deep cut along his ribs, but delivering a disabling blow to Valerius's weapon arm. The knife clattered to the floor. Kale drove his fist into Valerius's face, then again, sending the commander staggering back against the main control console. He had him. He could end it. But a searing pain erupted in his side. One of the guards from the corridor, slipping past Lyra's defense, had shot him. The wound was bad, a deep, cauterized hole that was bleeding profusely. His strength began to fail. Valerius saw his chance and lunged, not at Kale, but at the console, trying to accelerate the drill's final sequence. "You're too late," he snarled, his fingers flying over the keypad. With the last of his strength, Kale pushed himself off the floor. He didn't try to stop Valerius. He didn't try to destroy the console. He saw the emergency access platform, a small disc used by engineers to service the upper workings of the drill shaft. He staggered towards its activation panel. He looked back through the doorway. Lyra had finished her fight. The guards were down. She stood there, her light pulsing with concern, watching him. Their eyes met across the space, a final, silent farewell. He gave her a faint, weary smile. He slammed his bloody hand on the panel. The command he entered was not for a standard service check. It was a full, unimpeded, emergency descent. Destination, Core Nexus. The platform dropped out from under him, plunging him into the vast, dark abyss of the drill shaft. The wind of his passage shrieked past him. Above, the command deck became a shrinking rectangle of light. He saw Lyra's silhouette there for a moment, a figure of grace and sorrow, before it vanished. He was falling toward the heart of the world. Far below, he could see the monstrous, grinding head of the drill, its tungsten carbide teeth glowing cherry red as it chewed through the final layers of the moon's mantle. It was meters from its goal. The platform slowed, then stopped, its automated sensors detecting the immense energy of the nexus just below. He was in a vast cavern of pulsing, living crystal. This was the heart of the silicates, the source of the symphony. The drill bit broke through the cavern ceiling with a deafening roar, a violation of metal and hate in this sacred space. Kale pushed himself to the edge of the platform. He was dying. His blood was leaving a dark trail on the metal floor. But he was where he needed to be. He looked at the central crystal, a flawless, glowing heartstone the size of a building. He reached out his hand. The moment his fingers touched its surface, the universe dissolved into light. There was no pain. There was only a sense of release, of expansion. His consciousness, his memories, his scars, his very identity, Kale, the weary soldier, frayed and unraveled. It flowed out of the confines of his broken body and into the crystalline lattice. He felt everything. He felt the slow, patient life of the rock, the ancient memories stored in every facet, the deep, resonant song of the silicate consciousness. He was a drop of water falling into the ocean. He was home. And then he acted. The entirety of the moon's focused life force, guided by the ghost of his human intent, surged through the nexus. A wave of pure harmonic resonance, visible as a ripple of shimmering, blue light, pulsed outward from the moon's core. It struck the deep core drill first. The massive machine, a pinnacle of axiom engineering, did not explode. It simply ceased to be, its molecular bonds shaken apart. It disintegrated into a cloud of inert, microscopic dust. The wave continued, passing through the moon's crust without harming it, and erupted into space. On the bridge of the Axiom flagship, alarms blared. Then, one by one, they fell silent. The ship's mighty fusion core sputtered and died. The weapons systems went dark. The lights flickered and went out. Across the entire fleet, every ship was rendered inert, their power systems overloaded by a frequency they were never designed to withstand. They became dead hunks of metal, floating tombs in the silent void. The war was over. It had ended not with a bang, but with a perfect, silent chord. In the ruined command center of Titan's Maw, Valerius stared at his blank screens, his face a canvas of disbelief and utter ruin. Everything he had built, everything he had killed for, had been turned to ash in an instant. Lyra stood alone at the edge of the gaping drill shaft. She could no longer sense the singular, focused mind of the man named Kale, but she could feel him everywhere. He was in the gentle hum of the crystals beneath her feet. He was in the faint, residual energy that now suffused the station. He was a quiet, constant, peaceful presence. He was the moon. The silence that followed was not one of absence, but of profound, eternal vigil. 10 years later, the name Axiom Corporation was now a footnote in history books, a cautionary tale of corporate overreach and hubris. The Titan's Maw incident, as it came to be known, had triggered a cascading collapse. The loss of its fleet and its most valuable asset, coupled with the subsequent revelations about its genocidal ambitions, had shattered its power structure. In its wake, a new coalition of independent systems had risen, founded on principles of mutual respect for all forms of life, sentient or otherwise. The moon, once a symbol of brutal exploitation, was now a protected sanctuary. It was no longer called Titan's Maw. It was known across the settled galaxy as Kale's Rest. It was a place of pilgrimage, a monument not of stone or steel, but of an entire world left in peace. Humanity had learned a hard and vital lesson here, that the universe was filled with wonders far greater than any resource to be extracted. Lyra, now known by her true silicate resonance name, which translated roughly as Heart Singer, served as the ambassador for her people. The silicates, safe and whole once more, had slowly begun to open communication with humanity, sharing their ancient wisdom, their deep understanding of the cosmos. Their first and most trusted contact was a retired captain named Even, Kale's former superior, a gruff, honest man who had led the investigation into Axiom's fall and ensured the truth was told. He stood with her now on a quiet ridge overlooking the valley where the mining facility had once scarred the landscape. The ruins had been dismantled and removed with painstaking care years ago. Nature, in its slow, geological way, was reclaiming its own. The valley was filled with a forest of newly grown crystals, their facets catching the light of the distant sun. He would have liked this, Even said, his voice a low rumble. The quiet. Lyra did not reply with words. She had learned to use a vocalizer, but preferred her native form of communication. She projected a feeling of serene agreement, a warmth that belied the cold vacuum around them. They were not looking at a statue or a plaque. Their memorial was the moon itself. As the long lunar twilight began to fall, a new light appeared. It was a soft, gentle luminescence that seemed to emanate from the very rock beneath their feet. The entire surface of the moon began to glow with a faint, rhythmic pulse, a soft blue-white light that waxed and waned like a slow, sleeping heartbeat. It was a beacon in the endless night, a silent promise of safety and vigilance. It was Kale. He was the porch light, raised on a dark moon. He was the silent guardian, the warden of peace. His sacrifice had not been an end, but a transformation. His personal identity was gone, subsumed into a purpose far greater than any one man. He had become a symbol, a quiet hero whose legacy was written in the steady, gentle light of a world he had saved. Lyra reached down and placed her hand flat upon the glowing ground. The light seemed to brighten infinitesimally at her touch. She could feel him there, a consciousness woven into the fabric of the planet, a presence of profound and unending peace. The cost had been immense, the sorrow of his loss a permanent echo in her being. But the peace was real. It was enduring, and his sacrifice would never be forgotten.